Hi everyone! I just had some really interesting realization about Season 4 and I really want to share this with you guys. So as you may know, we get those new Tormented bosses. You can see one of them here right now, Andariel, one of the new ones, and she's level 200. So those level 200 bosses are basically some of the high-end challenges that you can conquer with your characters in Season 4 now. And they are extremely rewarding. And I did a bit of napkin math on this and actually realized that it will really completely shift the way that we farm items in those boss encounters. If you remember from Season 2 or Season 3, if you have played those, people were very upset that you had to farm Duriel like hundreds of times basically to try to get anything. And it was extremely annoying, extremely boring, because the Duriel fight was also not really challenging. And now we actually have some pretty interesting bosses here. This also means that you can't just walk in there on day one and kind of just blast them down, as you may be used to from Duriel, for example. Or you can't just invite a Hodabarb that bonks it and that's it. Although these days you can probably invite a Necro that does the same, even on those bosses. It won't be like an insurmountable challenge, let's say, at least. But at the very least, it will probably not be a super face roll for most people. That being said though, those bosses are super rewarding, because when we played on the PTR, we had a ×5 cost for a ×5 reward for those bosses. So the idea from the developers was that, well, you pay more, but you fight them less often and you get all of the loot back anyway, basically. So that was the idea. And then after the PTR, Blizzard has decided that they're going to reduce the cost and keep the rewards the same. So they reduce the cost to ×3 and you get ×5 the rewards. And that actually changes things pretty significantly, and I will show you why. So the reason why this is so important is because, well, you multiply the materials that you get from the other bosses. You have the 4 pre-bosses, so to say, the Varshan, the Grig that you use for Duriel, and now Zir and Beast that you use for Andariel. And the way this worked is that you had to kill each of them 2 times to get 1 Duriel summon. And then Duriel had like a 2% Uber drop rate, so I have to kill Duriel 50 times on average to get 1 Uber drop. And this means you have to kill the other bosses 100 times. So this is like a little calculation here. If you do like a big farming session, let's say 100 kills of the pre-bosses, 50 kills of Duriel gives you 1 Uber unique, and well, a bunch of other stuff, I guess. So this is how the game used to work in Season 2 and Season 3. And now it gets really interesting when we look at Season 4, because of this ×3 cost and ×5 reward scheme that I just explained. So number one is, first of all, those bosses have an Uber drop rate. I believe it's 0.5%. And you already get a bit of like a chance to get something there, which is pretty cool. But also when you farm those materials to then do Duriel and Andariel, you get a lot more out of it. So for example, we have 10 kills here, farming session, and this means you need 30 times the materials to get 50 times the rewards. And well, this is not exactly the same as here, because here we did 100 rewards basically, but you don't need more than that to get the same result. So first of all, you have like a bit of a chance to get an Uber unique here, so a quarter of an Uber unique from killing those bosses only 10 times with the 30 the nuts here basically. And now if you go down to Uber Duriel and Andariel, you can do 8.33 summons of those. So in this calculation I only did 3, this is just like some change here basically, I left that out. But if you go down here, now you do Tormented, Duriel and Andariel, and you can use those materials that you gathered from those only 10 kills basically to summon them 8 times. And if you summon them 8 times, you're gonna get 40 times the rewards, giving you on average 0.8 Uber uniques. So if you add those two things up, well, that's a bit more than 1 Uber unique on average, from just 10 kills here and 8 kills down here. And well, the only thing that really holds you back here are those Stygian Stones. So you can see this here right now. This is actually in the preview. Those Stygian Stones, those are a new material that you can find in the pit. And they drop more and more the higher you go in the pit. They didn't really say exactly when they start dropping and how much you get. But at least on the PTR, it was not a problem at all to get those Stygian Stones, really. If you had a powerful build and you went to like high enough pit levels, let's say, it was totally fine. You would never really get enough of those other boss materials to use all those Stygian Stones. At least that was my impression. That might have been tweaked a little bit, but either way, I don't think it's really supposed to be a bottleneck, because I think they really want you to farm those Tormented bosses as long as you are strong enough. And now if you look at the total distribution and the farming time required to actually farm all those boss materials, let's just ignore the fighting for a second. Well, in the Season 2, Season 3 scenario here, you needed 100 Varshan and Grig mats for 50 Duriel kills. And then here we only farm 30 mats. This is a third, less than a third of the materials that you previously used to get the kind of the same outcome. So you only need to farm around a third of the materials to then do those other bosses here a few times. And the thing is, you get a lot more materials in Season 4. Like these boss materials are dropping like candy basically everywhere. You farm Helltide, you kill some elites, sometimes it just pops like a Zir blood. And you go in Helltide, you open those chests, you get living steel everywhere. It's crazy. And sometimes you just get like some Millennium Heart, sometimes you get some other Varshan mats there. You get these Beast in the Ice materials from Nightmare Dungeons super easily as well, because you can just like steamroll tier 100 dungeons now, basically any build. So in general, acquiring those boss materials is way faster and way easier, because you just get them from elites, events, just random drops. It's crazy. So in the end, this means that not only do you only need like 30% of the mats compared to before, but you also get those mats faster. So I would say probably it's like 4 or 5 times faster compared to what we're used to when we're looking at Season 2 and Season 3. And the only real question mark here is going to be, what about those Stygian Stones? And as I mentioned, I don't expect this to be a huge problem. And one last point that is kind of important here as well is that in Season 4, uniques have kind of fallen off a bit compared to legendary items, thanks to the tempering mods and the new item stats that you can roll on all of the gear. And we do expect a bit of nerfs there, but nothing that will really shift the overall meta around. So this means that in general, you actually don't really use uniques anymore. In fact, most of my build planners that I've made, and I've made like 15 builds now or something, actually don't even have a single unique in them. Or maybe they have like one that is like some build defining item, you know, like a Fractured Winter Glass or Frozen Orb or something like that. And most of the time you don't even care about Uber uniques anymore that much actually. There are definitely still cases of Uber uniques being really valuable. Grandfather in particular is probably the overall strongest out there, especially for the barbs. And then you also have stuff like Doombringer that's really good, because you really want to stack that survivability in the pit. And yeah, maybe some builds still want to run Shaco, but for example, from my personal experience, like Fury Craftiness builds, it turns out that Shaco is not necessarily that crazy anymore, because you can get a lot more skill ranks these days and so on. So some of those Uber uniques are still pretty good. Some of them are actually best in slot for some builds, but you're not still going to put like 5 Uber uniques into every single build as long as you have those Uber uniques. So it's not like you have to grind a Doombringer and a Starless and a Shaco and a Grandfather, you know, all at once in order to have, you know, the best build possible. Instead, yeah, maybe you're gonna throw in 1, maybe 2 on a barb or something. And that's probably about it when it comes to Uber uniques for most builds. And this means that if you look at this farming session here, where let's say previously, for example, from my experience, playing Season 2 and Season 3, I got like, I don't know, 7 Uber uniques in Season 2, I think. And I got like 13 in Season 3 until I had what I wanted, basically. So 13 Uber uniques means like a lot of these materials. Yeah, I found like around 300 plus or so of these bosses in Season 3. And then, of course, ×4 in the boss rotation for Duriel. I would have like 1200 kills or so. Yeah, that is roughly what I have done in Season 3. So it was pretty crazy. So for my own personal experience in Season 3, for example, with 13 drops, yeah, I found roughly like 300 Varshans and Grigs, and then ×4 in boss rotations, that would be 600 Duriel summons. This is roughly what I've done to get those items. So that kind of checks out here. And well, obviously that was an insane grind. So if you look at, you know, how fast you can farm those bosses, I would say if you're really fast, you can do like maybe 1 Duriel summon per half hour or so. So let's say 2 Duriel summons per hour, and then ×4, that's 8 Duriels per hour of grinding. If you're like really fast and really efficient, and it doesn't actually count the time you need to farm those bosses a few hundred times as well, because you obviously have a lot of kills to do. So that alone is like, you know, dozens of hours or something. So there goes that. And now in the future, let's say I want like maybe 2 Uber uniques, maybe 3 Uber uniques in total. You get already free sparks just from playing the game, from season journey and the season quest line and stuff like that. So you already almost have an uber unique anyway, just from playing the game. And if you only play like one build and you need like maybe one uber unique, well, you just need to get like one drop or something, salvage it if it's not the right one, and boom, you got your uber unique for your build basically. And even if you need multiple of those, the farming requirement just went so far down, you actually barely even have to do those bosses anymore. So compared to what it was with like these hundreds and hundreds of boss kills, I am very glad that this has changed. And this is actually a really cool new system now where you can like focus more on, for example, the pit pushing and, you know, making alts and just having fun, and not necessarily feel like so focused on just like grinding hell tides all day long, grinding whispers all day long, and trying to get those uber drops basically from Duriel, and that's the only thing that matters. So I think that's excellent, and I'm really looking forward to playing this season, especially after this realization here with how much less boss farming it actually is to do. Now, one last consideration here is that for the Ultra Blasters, you might actually want to try to get uber uniques that have greater affixes on them. But I guess at that point, we're talking about some really try-hard, like, you know, like players basically, where not even I think I would consider that really to be a viable option. I believe the greater affix chance is like 10%, like individually. So if you want to get like, you know, one greater affix on an item, yeah, you have to get like 10 shakos or something to get like one greater affix, and then there's 4 different stats on it, and then, you know, it might roll the wrong run most likely. So yeah, I guess realistically you're not really looking at farming greater affix shakos or something like that. I guess you could if you really like boss farming, but ultimately it's kind of unrealistic, I guess, to try to get at least multiple greater affixes unless you get extremely lucky or something and you win the lottery. And there are certainly like a few items that are extremely valuable when you find them with greater affixes. I guess the biggest example here is Tyrael's Might. So this is the new uber unique that drops now in Season 4, is this one. And for example, getting like a greater affix on the maximum all res on this thing is ridiculously powerful. So this item is really good if you want to have extra defenses in your build, and especially this maximum all resistance. Like if you manage to like up this to you know, closer to the cap basically, then you're gonna be super protected. So that is one of those examples, I guess, where a greater affix would be really neat. But most of the other stuff doesn't also really matter that much. Like if you look at this item here, all res, all stats, yeah, some damage reduction, it's cool and all, but ultimately there's like this one stat that is really the kicker. If you look at other items here, like Shako, yeah, it would be pretty cool to have like a greater affix cooldown or something, but it's not really required. I guess one thing that would be kind of noticeable as well would be the maximum life on a Grandfather. If you hit that one as a greater affix, well, that's pretty juicy for sure, because it already has such a high base value. Or you hit the ignore durability loss. How about that one? And I guess Doombringer is also probably like a pretty big one here with the extra maximum life. If that is a greater affix, that will actually be quite noticeable, I guess. But outside of that, these other like stats on these uber uniques don't really matter enough for you to really want to farm them as a greater affix, I guess. So I don't think this would really be something that anyone would reasonably do, because the stats are just like too small to really matter outside of like, yeah, the maximum all res, the life, and the life here, I guess. In any case, that's my summary here of what to expect from the boss farming. So TLDR, a lot fewer bosses and a lot more rewards, especially if you farm those tormented bosses. So you want to try to get your build online to farm those tormented bosses as soon as possible. And this means you generally want to invest into a build this season that has pretty good single target damage. Because even if you do tormented boss rotations with other people, well, someone has to kill those bosses, and they're gonna have a few billion life. They are way more tanky than Duriel was in the past. So Duriel Informant had 180 million in Season 3, and like a Foreman Tormented Duriel is probably gonna have like 8 billion or so. So that's like times 40. That's a lot of life. So you definitely want to bring some big single target damage there, and yeah, maybe 1 or 2 carries or something. But yeah, it looks really cool though. I'm really excited for this. So hope you enjoyed my little like summary here and then the math that I threw around. So I'm gonna put this in the description as well for you to check out if you are curious about what I calculated here in more detail. But this is what I got here for the boss farming strats in Season 4. So hope you like this, and see you guys next time.